Hello and welcome to your virtual reunion. We've had a great week hearing from Dean David Schmidtlein on the state of the school. Professor Fiona Murray and Phil Budden presented on crisis innovation, and Bryn Penne-Burkhart from the MIT Sloan Career Development Office shared her process for navigating your career at any age and stage. We are thrilled to have Professors Jason Jay and Roberto Rigobon joining us today to share their work on the promise of a sustainable future. So you can see on the screen that both professors are MIT alumni themselves, and I'll also point out that Professor Jason Jay is celebrating a 10th reunion this year. So we are in great company with our alumni viewers, and I think you'll all agree that Jason and Roberto are the perfect addition to our lineup for our virtual reunion 2020. So a few housekeeping notes before we get started. Alumni may submit questions via the Q&A panel in the Zoom interface. And please include your name and class year on that. You may also upvote questions that you would like to have answered today. And lastly, we will make the slides and recording available to our viewers after the session, so you can watch for that within the next week or so. And with that, I thank you all for being with us today. Thank you, Professor Jason Jay and Professor Roberto Rigobon. I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. Well, one of the best parts about reunions is all the cool branded swag that we get to make or enjoy. We both got our MIT masks, but the nice thing about doing this virtually is that you actually can see our faces, so we can take these off for our session today. So really excited to be with all of you.
Wait a second.
What?
I thought that you told me that I needed to wear this so if people are recording this so I don't pick my nose.
Yeah, well, you know, now you're gonna get the full view in high definition.
Okay.
So what we're going to do today is give you a little bit of an introduction to some work that Roberto and I have been doing at the Sustainability Initiative at MIT Sloan. Kind of give an overview of what's been happening with the Sustainability Initiative, the promise framework that has been a guiding kind of architecture for us as we move along, and some of the recent thinking and recent developments in this, particularly in light of this incredible moment of crisis and challenge and trade-offs that we're all facing right now with the COVID pandemic. So first off, just to say the Sustainability Initiative is going strong. We were founded in 2006-07, and as some of you in the 2010, 2015, and 2019 cohorts know, we've built out a sustainability certificate program. That community has been continuing to grow and flourish. This year, we graduated 63 students, which was a record, and we had a fantastic virtual graduation with families and even some Ewoks in attendance. We celebrated with that final celebration scene from Star Wars with Nerd Pride. And we had a record number of executive MBAs this year joining the certificate, 19 of them, which reflects kind of the broadening span of people around the Institute who are engaged on these sustainability topics. And the other thing that the EMBA participation reflects is how vibrant and rich a topic sustainability has become in the business world as folks are looking to bring sustainability strategies into play in their organizations. Part of that is driven by the massive growth of ESG investment over the past few years, the growth of investment strategies that try to incorporate environmental, social, and governance factors into their decision-making, or ESG, and which reflects sort of broadening, growing concern about the suite of global issues that we face, from climate change to inequality, to pandemics, to the lack of sort of visibility and transparency in global supply chains. All of our students and the companies that we work with are really working hard to tackle all these questions. And what we've found is that as we go to do this work with our students and with these companies, we need to have a broad and holistic framework for thinking about sustainability and what that really means. And so a few years back, we started working on a framework that could try to bring together the different dimensions that we were thinking about with respect to sustainability. And the result of that was this promise framework, which is a way of thinking about the nested systems that we're all a part of. From our personal well-being, that's a key part of sustainability that all of us are very much attending to right now, as you know, our masks attest to. Going up to relationships and organizations and how do we make our organizations thrive and sustainable amid all of these challenges. And then going up to the bigger picture, the context in which we're operating, the markets and economy, the institutions and culture, the rules, the policies, the public policy, and then to this wider set of societal and environmental issues that we're facing, from inequality to climate change. And the reason we found this framework useful is because it helps us to illuminate some of the trade-offs or the tensions or the conflicts that can exist between these dimensions when we're trying to, for example, preserve the health and well-being of our employees right now in the middle of a pandemic, but by potentially closing our retail shops and stores and restaurants, but the incredible sort of economic and market challenges that ensue. And so it also shows us a pathway toward innovation, because essentially innovating for sustainability is about trying to find ways to break these trade-offs between these different dimensions. And that's really what this MIT sustainability community is all about, is about confronting these big challenges and trying to find ways to innovate around them. Over the years, we've evolved from initially being an education-focused initiative, doing things like that sustainability certificate program that's available to master's level students across the Institute, to becoming more and more of a research initiative that is developing new research projects, new tools to help drive the dialogue and to improve the quality and the rigor of sustainability efforts in the wider world. One example that some of you may have heard about is the work that John Sturman has been doing as part of our initiative around climate simulation tools. The En-ROADS model, which is a tool for assessing and understanding different climate policies and strategies and investment strategies, has been a great way for us to use the science of the interactions between the climate and our socio-technical economic system to really confront people with what are the options we have and what are the pathways that might get us to a safer 2-degree future. And to do that in a way where people can experiment for themselves, learn for themselves with these kinds of tools. And it embodies a central principle for what we have done from the beginning with the initiative, which is to support learning through safe experimentation in the classroom, with our host organizations for action learning projects in the SLab course, through simulation tools, and now increasingly through some tools that Roberto has been developing in thinking about this promise framework from the standpoint of management and investment. How can investors place capital in ways that try to reward companies for advancing on all dimensions of promise, not just the traditional market indicators that we use? And how can managers try to create enterprises that break some of these tensions and trade-offs? Roberto, do you want to say a bit about what that work looks like right now?
Thank you so much for all of you for joining us. And I hope that everybody is healthy and safe. And we wish you the best in this stage. I know that many of you are coming from different countries, so we are all in different stages of this process. And I hope, and I think that I'm speaking also on all the MIT staff and faculty and Jason on our behalf, is that I hope that you are all safe doing this. So I work on measurement, which is the most boring topic in the history of humankind. I mean, so if you think about it, when I tell people what do you do at MIT, I tend to lie. I tell them, oh, I work in markets and finance, and people, cool, and what do you do there? And then if they get too specific, then I have to tell them that my life is about measurement. And then they look at me and say, like, you must be a real nerd. I said, yeah, I am a total, absolute nerd. I'm excited about measuring things. But one thing that I would like to say is that COVID has highlighted very clearly how important measurement is in general. And it's one of my reactions to COVID has been that that we're making decisions on an extreme degree of ignorance and uncertainty. Uncertainty because we don't know things, and ignorance because we don't even measure the things that we know that we should be measuring. So it's not wonder why we all look as if we are making random choices in the world. And this is true, I would say, that in almost every country. So one of the examples I have about that measurement is we are not even measuring the death due to COVID correctly. And the reason is a very simple one. We measure people that get sick and unfortunately die. And it's very unfortunate. This is a very nasty virus, and unfortunately it's going to kill many, many, many people in the world. It's a very sad outcome. Now, our reaction to a lot of this to reduce the contagion has been to lock down and create a situation of hibernation, actually. I think it's more than lockdown, it's almost like hibernation. We're asking people to slow down up to infinity and say, please stay home. Well, you know, that has also consequences. And the issue is that we have no clue and we have no measurement, correct measurement about those consequences. And this depends, the consequences vary across countries. In Sweden, in Germany, in the United States, staying at home is different than when you do that in Brazil, Argentina, or even Bolivia or Nigeria. So the stage and the level of support that countries can provide to their citizens vary tremendously. And even in the United States, there are issues like domestic violence that I am incredibly concerned and in terms of how badly we measure it. And I always ask the question, well, we are asking a lady to go back to her home where the violence takes place. If unfortunately she dies, should we count that as a death of COVID, or should we just count that for domestic violence? See, truly, we don't even know how to count for that. And therefore, I think that measurement is a first order issue. It's impossible for us to make good decisions without having some form of proper measurement about all the consequences of what we do. That's exactly what Jason is saying. This is highlighting different aspects of that promise framework. You know, the public health crisis will be one issue that is on the S side, on the social and politics side, and domestic violence will be about relationships, and that will be on the R. And we are clearly, unfortunately, in this example, we are making choices between these two. So my work on ESG, which is, again, let me repeat what Jason said, is environment, social, and governance. These are aspects that we think that companies should be paying attention. My job has been trying to think about how to measure and how bad are the measurements that we have. In fact, actually, I always start that way. So instead of actually starting thinking about how I will measure something, I almost always start by saying, like, how can I criticize something, okay? This is
easier to blow things up.
Yeah, this is my Italian blood. like if you can be negative, why not? So I always start by criticizing first, and therefore part of what the research has been to highlight how we are measuring. There are many what is called rating agencies. These are not credit rating agencies. These are called ESG rating agencies. We have many famous companies like MSCI, Sustainalytics, like Dow Jones, Thomson Reuters. So there are many companies and many data providers that have been measuring in some form the ethical behavior of firms. And these are called ESG ratings, and they give you a score for every firm. What we have found is that there's a tremendous inconsistency in those. For example, this is a graph that we always show. These are the two rating agencies, and every dot is supposed to be the same company on the exact same year. And what we did was, instead of actually showing you the rating, we renormalized the rating to be it's like a ranking that goes from 1 to 20, okay? So these are the common firms. And part of what you can see here is that if they were measuring the same thing, these dots should be aligned in the middle. I mean, if you're measuring the same thing, like a credit rating agency, this should be actually populated in the middle. They're correlated because, as you can see, they're actually going up. So the one that has a higher rating in A has a higher rating in B. But truly, there are many companies that, for example, has a high rating in A, about close to 16, which is the highest numbers that you can get in that rating, that have very low ratings that are below the average for rater B. So you see this tremendous dispersion. What we did was to in our paper was to analyze, I call this the confetti graphs in our paper. So what we did was to look at this firm by firm. So these are, for example, the ratings, the exact numbers for each of the ratings. These are 5 here. Now, our new version of the paper has 6. And as we get more raw data, we include more of these. This just show you the dispersion. So the companies that can be, so close to 1 means that these are the top companies rated by that rating agency. Close to 0 means that they are at the bottom. And in fact, 0 will be the bottom, actually the lowest one, and 1 will be actually the highest one. You can see they're all over the place. So how can you make a decision with this as a data? So in fact, if you want to invest in any company that is in this place, imagine that you want to justify your investment. You can always justify your investment. You just have to pick which rater you want to use to tell your investors, you know, that's a good firm. Because why? Look at the rating. They're at the top 10%. Of course, almost everybody will be at the top 10% with this degree of disagreement. So what we did was to decompose this. There are 3 areas. So one is measurement. These are people. So let me do this with an example. So imagine that I want to measure how I treat labor in my company. So at MIT, how do we treat labor? Well, there are different ways how to measure that. So I can measure that by, for example, the turnover, how many people quit. I can measure that by the number of complaints in a labor court. That's a different measure, but they will be related, but they are not identical. And one of the things that we did was by looking at the raw data is that these companies are using different indicators. So they think they're measuring the same thing, but they're measuring the same thing with very different variables. And that creates discrepancy. And we call that measurement discrepancy. That's about 50. It's a little bit more than 50, but just to remind, it's about 50% of the problem. So 50% of the discrepancy is that they truly are measuring different things. What happens to, for example, after that is that we look at how the data is put together. So there are 2 ways. One is we have the same categories that we are measuring. So I measure labor standards and environmental, and with those, I create a ranking. And there could be differences in the way we construct those rankings, and therefore how we weight. And the other one is that maybe I look at labor and environment, and Jason is looking at labor, environment, and, for example, water supply. Okay, so he adds a category that I don't have. So that implies that his measurement will be different because the scope of what he's is including is different. So we measure those 2, and we can decompose this, and our methodology can decompose this firm by firm. So now, instead of using this as just a critique, let me share a little bit my views about how we should measure, and then hopefully we can open for questions. So for example, I have been thinking a lot. In fact, I started writing that paper about 4 years ago. And I have to say that from the moment I started to today, I have changed tremendously in my view about how this should be measured. So this is my thinking the last 3 weeks. Okay, so this evolves faster than that bad policy in an emerging market. Okay, so it just evolves very fast. But I've been thinking that truly what you would like to do in ESG is to measure ethical behavior. So truly what we want to do in the concept is a company going to hurt the environment? Is a company going to hurt the workers? Is a company going to hurt the customers? You have several stakeholders, and the question is, by any chance are you going to do something that is unethical? And so the first thing I did, I have spent a lot of time trying to learn ethics. It's like how people think about this seriously. And from that, I have constructed a different way about how we have to measure. The world right now is putting a lot of emphasis on producing one ranking. So to try to produce one number for every firm. And then the reason is that we are very competitive. We are like very, sports driven. So we want that who is the first one, and I'm first and you are second. And I want to have a very clear ranking who's number 1 and who's number 2. So something that is incredibly complex, and in a second I will return to that. So you can show that a little bit later, Jason. But I want to show you the complexity, there's no need. I don't think there is a need to simplify the complexity. I think that actually plays no purpose, truly. Now, I understand it makes the life for the investor simpler, but by making it simpler, we make far too many mistakes. So I think that we have to go through a process of learning and embracing that complexity so we can actually learn what are the different dimensions of unethical behavior. So first, studying about ethics, there are three school of thoughts of ethics that I find particularly interesting for firms, okay? So one is called virtue. And the idea of a virtue, I'm going to translate, whatever I have learned to the word firm, okay? So like thinking about us as firms and you can do a search and replace and put person, okay? So you like, it says
Government.
Yeah, exactly. Or government, exactly. So or any regulatory institution for that matter. You're absolutely correct. So but the one in virtue says, what is the kind of firm I want to be? So you truly, what you do is you tell what your aspirations are. I want to be honest. I want to be, I would like to be good looking, but that doesn't seem to be an ethical aspect yet. But so you what you want to do is to exalt the virtues and the attributes that you think are important. So that's a very important one. Now, how do I do the mapping from virtue to the firms? Is by looking at the statements. What are the statements I make? Because in those statements, they are telling me what they want to do. So statements matter. Second, there's another theory on ethics that is called deontological, which is about duty, which is more or less it allows people to decide when you have a conflict. It's an ethical theories that are very good for that. So it tells you what you think should be done, what is the right thing to do. Okay, and so when you talk to a policeman or you talk to someone in the military, you realize that the sense of duty that they have is very different from the normal individual. Okay. And again, they are giving up their life and they feel that they are giving up their life because they feel that it's important to do that. There's no virtue, good or bad. And by the way, there can be a virtue, good or bad, associated with that, but this is a sense of duty. And I've been thinking a lot about how can I translate that into firms. And the way I think about it, these are related to the procedures and the actions that firms take. Mm-hmm. So the procedures is a kind of set of rules that firms have that tells them what to do when they have a trade-off, when they have to decide, for example, should I build this particular railroad and that particular railroad might have an environmental impact. So what should I do? How I should think about that? And then what are the actions that they take? Because sometimes procedures are not clear enough and therefore there's kind of leeways of gray areas. And therefore, procedures and actions tend to matter at the moment. But then we want to know, the third theory is about consequentialists. That's the one that we economists love. And so we economists are obsessed with the consequences and the impact. It just tells me what was the outcome, what is the result, okay? So now, if you just concentrate on results, what happens if a firm is actually have very good intentions,
yes,
that has very good procedures, that took right actions and was unlucky? Mm-hmm. What do we do? So you see, the issue is that when you think about the way the justice system is organized in every country, we allow for accidents to take place. When we observe an accident, we try to infer from the actions and the attitude, was that on purpose? Is that a first-degree murder, or is it just an accident? So truly, by concentrating only on the R, which is the results part. By the way, we call this a SPAR, and this is because Jason and I are in the business of creating yes.
Battles.
Sorry?
Conflict and battles.
Exactly, conflict and battles. Yes, exactly.
Industry, yeah.
Yeah. So, but so in that sense, that aspect of the way ethics thinks about the problems is something that we need to bring to the way we measure ethical behavior in the firms. So what I have done a little bit, and this is just an exercise that we're studying, but the way I'm thinking about is when you look at promise, I can create a matrix. And in that matrix, what I have is all the dimensions of promise and then all the way we measure. And let me start with the M, which are economic outcomes and markets in general. When companies actually give you statements, and that's the earnings announcement, we look at their procedures, we look at their actions, and we look at their economic results, we measure that relatively well. We're really good at actually paying attention to all of that. By the way, the color here is trying to reflect the degree of how good or bad it is. And the idea is that, you know, when I put white, is that there's almost nothing that we measure there. When I put the dark blue, means that that is kind of relatively good, that we have good measures for that. And when I put okay and some, it's just like two things in the middle. I just wanted to have 4 colors as opposed to just 3. Okay, so there's some that I feel that we do a little bit better. And by the way, firms, why I'm not putting a dark blue on the firms is because firms unfortunately have ability to hide some of their economic outcomes. So it's not true that we observe everything. There are 2 million loopholes in accounting that firms use. But when you look at, for example, about this word, what occurs is that when you are closer to things like our personal on the environment, closer to things like relationships and society, we have many missing boxes, many. And in fact, we are barely measuring these aspects. And in fact, for example, for relationships, I put a light blue there because in a relationship, we measure either the end of the relationship when it breaks and trust has been lost and it's almost gone, or you measure statements and nothing in the middle. There's actually no procedures. Very few people pay even attention to the procedures, and firms do not pay attention to how they impact the life of their workers. And so, for example, there are many researchers at MIT. We are not the only ones that are thinking about this. There are many researchers at MIT that are thinking about, for example, the conflicts that are inherent here. Like, how do you deal with markets and organizations, which is the quality of the jobs that you offer to your workers? Truly, I have not found, well, maybe there is one, but I have not found firms that says, I want to make the life of my workers miserable. I mean, no one actually says that publicly, maybe a criminal organization. But truly, to be honest, many organizations make the life of their workers totally miserable. Absolutely and completely miserable. They're really good at following the strategy to make the life of those workers miserable. So we make statements, but then we don't measure anything. We only measure when the worker is so upset that either quits, and that's why I put, you know, kind of the green at the end, or files a labor suit. But to be honest, many will actually not even file a labor complaint because it's very costly personally to do that. And and by the way, this is a problem of the society and institutions that we do not necessarily protect the people that have complained to the firms, especially in the United States. In Europe will be very different. So this is also country specific.
And Roberto, I should say that, you know, at MIT, like you mentioned at MIT Sloan, there's people working on these different dimensions. One of the questions that came up here is about Zeynep Ton's attempt to create an index about a good job strategy. And that's very much an attempt to try to improve the quality of measurement of procedures and actions at this level of organizations and markets, and trying to get a handle on some of those things that sit in between just the statements that may be meaningless and the like longer term consequences about turnover. There are some results measures in what she's looking at in terms of turnover and shrink and things like that. But a lot of that is about trying to shore up, you know, the better practices.
Yeah, and that's why I put it. So when I put the light blue there on P, I was thinking about Zeynep, exactly. Yeah. And again, she pays a lot of attention to the processes that you have to build in the organizations to be able to do a better job for that. So better job as treating your workers. So one message that I want to do is that rating agencies are doing this imperfectly. Many of those boxes have no numbers at all when we have looked at the raw data. So we are missing many of these boxes. But furthermore, one of the problems is that then they aggregate these boxes and they try to give you one single score for the whole company. Yes. And that, my friends, I actually think is a mistake. And the reason why that is a mistake is that if I am a firm and I know that that is a procedure and that's what is valuable to my investors, I might want to improve in one dimension that is easy for me to improve, not because I care, it's because I'm just trying to match a score.
Yeah.
And so if we need to embrace the complexity and the transparency. We need.
Well, and in fact, I think one of the things that I found really interesting in your paper was, this is a picture of that spread of the rating agencies along specific firms. And this was a subset of firms about which the rating agencies had the most agreement. And I called out these two companies, Imperial Tobacco Group is uniformly rated very high, and Shimano, which makes bicycle parts, is uniformly rated very low. And that has a lot more to do with the way that this aggregation procedure works than it does with kind of the underlying characteristics. Because when you linear average all these different ESG factors for Imperial Tobacco, the one about your product kills people is offset by all the other different metrics that you can, run reasonably well. And conversely on Shimano, a lot of the companies, a lot of these rating agencies weight very heavily whether you disclose information or not. And Japanese companies have a tendency not to disclose as much ESG information. And so it's uniformly rated low. Do I have that? Am I characterizing that correctly?
Yeah, you're correct. So my example is more violent than that one, because you know me. But my example is that actually, when you look at the rating of the Environmental Protection Agency of the United States, is lower than the rating agency of Exxon, Shell, and Mobil.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason is very simple. When you look at that boxes, Exxon will build a park and they get brownie points for that, okay? And the Environmental Protection Agency, they do nothing except you regulate.
Mm-hmm.
Think about it. In fact, if you think about the Environmental Protection Agency and you look at the Promise framework, they're useless on all of those. They're very important about the product that they create,
mm-hmm.
But many of the boxes will be zeros, so they are just missing. So truly in the end, I think it's a testament to the way the state it is, and part of what our job will be at the Sloan School is to try to provide some guidance to this complexity. So, and I think that this is kind of a hallmark of everything that we do at Sloan.
Yes.
Is that we try to, yes, we measure, and a lot of us at the Sloan School, we devote our life to measurement, and we measure one or two things. So so that means that to measure 28, we need 14 faculty, okay? So we need 14 people. We need people that are working on these things, that they care about these things, and that we have a guiding framework about how to think about statements, how to think about procedures, how to think about actions, and how we think about results. We need to collect better data on all of those dimensions, and then actually start filling these boxes around. We hope that this will teach all of us, so investors and firms, that it is okay to perform badly in one dimension. That's your area of opportunity. And it's not hidden by some average that is black boxed, and therefore we cannot do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think the overall message here too of what you're saying is about embracing the complexity. I mean, that's so critical in so many of these domains of sustainability. I mean, I mentioned earlier the climate simulation tool, right? I mean, one of the key problems that we're trying to solve there is this notion that there's a silver bullet to solve climate change, that there's going to be one solution, whether it's nuclear fusion or electric cars or trillion trees, that's going to get us to a 2-degree scenario. And what we are, what the science and the modeling clearly shows is that it's a much more multifaceted problem. There's a whole suite of different solutions that you have to push on if you want to bend the curve on carbon emissions. And so you need to embrace that complexity of how many different kinds of institutions need to be engaged with such a variety of different strategies. And it's a very similar story here with what you're describing about measurement, is that we can't just kind of go with there's one of the questions here from our audience is a practical question. If I want to invest $100,000 in ESG, how do I choose the rating company to trust or the investment management firm to put my money with? And you're looking, and I, as a, I've got the 401k from, I've got to invest too. Like, you want to find those simple answers, but unfortunately, this is not a simple territory.
Well, not yet. So it is so interesting because it got complex by time. So competition might actually have been a bad attribute in this area. So for that question,
competition among the rating agencies.
Yes, about the rating agencies and how I will actually use the $100,000. So you see, the way they started this was by defining sectors that were kind of bad sectors, sin sectors. They said, well, guns, you should not invest in guns, and you should not invest in tobacco, guns, CO2, and there was another one, and lotteries, okay? So lotteries are something like that. So you should not invest in lotteries, alcohol, tobacco, and
Firearms and weapons.
and yes, and I think that was more or less kind of how this started. You see, that one is actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, if you disagree with guns, then don't invest in guns. And if you disagree with tobacco because you think it's harmful, then don't invest in. So that was a very simple advice. It got complicated when people said, well, how do I tell when a company is truly a gun producer? And so, for example, if a steel company sells 90% of their production to a gun producer, is that a gun company or is that a steel company? So when we started going through that, it became more complicated. When we started, and therefore now, again, instead of having relatively simple rule of thumbs, investment has become more complicated in the sense that we are many attributes. So the first thing, my advice will be to go to that line of promise and tell me, what do you care about? Would be my first question. So my first question I cannot see who was, to Maria. My first question to Maria will be, what do you care? So tell me exactly what matters. So what is important for you? Once you understand what is important for you, then you are more likely to actually find an answer where to invest it. But clearly the answer is not to just trust the ESG company and rating agency that is just telling you a rating agency that is almost like random. So it would be hard for you to make a good decision. By the way, you might feel good that you are making a good decision because you have a justification, but at the end of the day, that justification, I hope that today is clear that is more likely to be random than anything else. So it's not truly based on the true ethical behavior of that firm. So first, what do you care? For example, if you care about human trafficking, just to make some examples, if you care about human trafficking, then there are sectors where human trafficking is far more severe than others. So I will learn about that. And clothing, for example, is one of them. Fisheries is one of them.
Yeah.
Sorry, Jason?
Yeah, seafood. I mean, Joanne DeZeger, who's on the sustainability faculty with us in operations, has been looking at that question of human trafficking in the seafood industry. It's pretty stark.
Yeah, so it is. So those industries. So my advice will be then, if you care about human trafficking, then you can construct your own sin sectors. You're saying that are consistent with your values and what you want to reflect. And I think that what it is. So if you care about poverty, for example, and you care about health for the poor, well, then that will be my guiding framework. And again, that doesn't mean that you have to put 100% of your portfolio on one single stock, but that implies that the decision of investment is harder. And I hope that it's harder because it should reflect first who you are. And you need to learn who you are to be able to answer a little bit of this.
So Roberto, let me ask you a question. So this is a question about, how should I invest my money? And that can be an inquiry into my values. But what if you're an institutional investor, like a pension fund or a endowment or a sovereign wealth fund where you represent some constituency that's investing money? How do you do that assessment of values?
So I mean, by the way, we are actually developing the tools now, and probably by the end of the summer, we will have a game. I don't know if it's called, you can call it a game, but it will look like a game. So it will look like the En-ROADS, which is kind of a simulation. This will be kind of playing a game. The idea is that we will be able to construct those preferences of the investors. So for example, imagine that I'm an asset manager and I have 200 investors that invest in a particular fund with me. I can survey them by asking them play a particular game. In the playing of the game, we will know the trade-offs. So for example, one of the things that we did to test this was to ask politicians. My first example about death is not a random example. We actually did that. We actually did that in many Latin American countries, where we ask people in government, if there's going to be an unnecessary death, and we were clarifying, there are some deaths that are going to happen because of the disease, but there are some deaths that happens because of our actions. So one is our healthcare system is not prepared, so that's the person did not receive the attention, that's a death that is unnecessary. And the death that happens, or not protection, for example, a lot of the healthcare workers in the United States have very little protection. Therefore, we are having unnecessary death by our own incompetence. But you also have unnecessary deaths that are happening by the lockdown. So my question to them was, okay, how will you actually trade off between these two deaths? Have you thought about this?
Yeah.
And truly, what they make choices. So when I say that they play a game, is that they're making choices. They're making choices between the number of people that will die in one way versus the number of people that will die in the other. And we adjusted these numbers to be relevant to the country that we were asking. So, I mean, so if I'm asking in Chile, I'm not going to kill 1 million people, okay? So it was reasonable. The numbers were reasonable for each of the countries and the estimates of unnecessary death that we have had. And it's very interesting because people have different preferences. Both are super unfair. By the way, both will be super unfair to the poor, because the poor are the ones that tend to have higher rates of suicides, and the poor are the ones that will find it harder to move their job to online. Almost everybody in this call, we can move our job online relatively easy, except the ones that are on healthcare. And by the way, those that are on healthcare, thank you for all the job and work that you have been doing. Jason's wife is one of them. But we have the privilege to choose, but a construction worker doesn't have that privilege. And therefore, the lockdown will be harsher on the people that suffer higher degrees of discrimination and they are lower income, but the lack of healthcare provision also damages the same population. Yeah. So when you ask that question to politicians, it becomes really hard for them to decide. And the beauty is that it changes the narrative. A lot of the narrative in countries that are governed by populism has been mostly to say, I don't want economic cost of the lockdown. Mm-hmm. So they are comparing lives in hospital dying with consumption and GDP. Mm-hmm. That might be a comparison that somebody wants to do, is fine. And before actually learning about this, I used to do that comparison. So I was one of them. I was one of the people that said, well, the only way to make a choice is to truly measure the value of life properly.
This is the economic value of a human life.
Yeah, and it's called a statistic. We don't want to call it this. So they put an S in front of it to apologize for the fact that it's badly measured. Yeah, so they call it the statistical value of life. And truly, I don't think that that's the way to be doing this. So truly the way to be doing this is to think about life and properly think about the consequences of our actions in terms of lives. And I know it's harder to measure, but that's not an excuse to take a shortcut.
Yeah.
So we actually tested that way, and I will never share the results. This was a one-time event that was doing this not only to test the procedure, where people have to make choices, and they're hard choices, and I don't allow people to say 0 and 0. That's the whole point. I know that everybody would say, can I have 0 and 0? Yeah. But that was not allowed, and it was an interesting exercise, not only to test the ability of what we could do, but to see the impact and the change in the narrative immediately. Immediately, the conversation changes. Absolutely, yeah. Immediately. And therefore,
you become much less anchored on kind of one ideological perspective when you see just how complex it is and how much, how emotionally laden it is as well. Right?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, so. Yeah, and some of these are, and this was not in the United States, but some of them are going to be for election soon. So the myopic behavior of the election was there.
Yes.
But when you change the question, you realize that they actually are humans. And they are something.
Yes.
So,
yes. One of the questions that came in from Jordan Frank was, what data do you wish you had for COVID-19? And some of what Jordan is supposing here is that it might be, type of transmission, kind of detailed data about epidemiology. But kind of what I'm hearing you say is, I want to understand the number of lives lost due to the lockdown, or due to all the other consequences. I mean, you mentioned my wife's in healthcare. I mean, the number of people who are dying of other diseases because they're not coming into the hospital, right? There's a whole suite of human consequences of this that we're not measuring, and then therefore it becomes very difficult to make grounded policy decisions.
Not only that, worse is that we're not measuring, therefore we assume it's zero.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So it's a because if we are not measuring, but at least we said, oh, wait, pay attention.
Yes.
It will. So it's not about the COVID. No, we are measuring COVID very well. I just read the question. So Frank, no, we're measuring, very well where the person got infected, the family, we test. So that part is the one that we're devoting tremendous amount of resources to measure properly.
Yes.
I think that one, I mean, it could be done better. Yeah, probably can be done better. I mean, almost everything can be improved. But that one we're doing relatively well is these displaced individuals that receive different forms of healthcare, and the stress that we are creating, and how many deaths that are producing. And it's not like I want to give ammunition to any political party. I just want to be precise about that. I am just concerned that by not measuring, we're just making horrible decisions. And by the way, this crisis is going to be used by the populists for their evidence.
Mm-hmm.
These events are so big, they are so catastrophic, that they provide evidence to every single individual that has any single ideology that you think about it. So for example, I don't think that I have said this to Jason, but I was talking to someone in Sustainability Initiative, mostly about the topic, because they said, oh, this will actually teach people that we need to take care of the environment. I said, well, maybe not. Mm-hmm. Because, you see, and by the way, as you see from the very beginning, I always tend to think about the worst first, okay? So, but I said, like, typically people will say, look at the weather, look at the air, so clean, the grass is so green, and it took only 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
So you see, they will say, like, the environment cannot be a problem, it can be fixed in 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The issue, well, I don't think so. I mean, do we need to put 40 million people on unemployment to solve the problem of the environment? I think that doesn't sound sustainable.
No, it's exactly not the way we would want to do it.
And it's completely against exactly what it was. So the issue is, this crisis, it will unfortunately produce evidence and examples that will support any single ideology that we have. And so therefore, one extreme will say, you see, we should have done this because another shock similar like this is going to hit, and the other one will say, no, you should not do it because we can fix it very easily. Say this is a foreign virus, which has been already said by Trump. So they will say, you see, if you had allowed me to close down China, this would have never happened. The immigration, I see very smart people in many different countries, by the way, that it is so interesting that they implicitly in that statement, they are blaming the foreign trade as part of the crisis. And when I tease them, said, oh, so you think this is a Chinese virus? Mm-hmm. They say, no, I'm sorry. So then they realized that in their statement, there was this blame. Now, does this virus come from China? Yes, this is a fact. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't mean that the solution is to close down trade. That, you understand that from A to B, there's no connection.
Yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, I do think it's very interesting to look at what are the underlying risk factors that ended up generating the virus in the first place. To your point about how you can kind of this moment is sort of a Rorschach test, and whatever your agenda is, you can sort of look for evidence for it. But I was looking into the history of zoonotic viruses that come from animals and transfer into humans. And this systematically happens with increasing rate as human settlements, both farms and urban settlements, expand into areas that were formerly populated with diverse wildlife populations. The population regime shifts to rats and bats that can interact effectively with the edge of a human settlement. And then those are exactly the populations of animals that have transferred, SARS, MERS, Ebola, like the last several major epidemics have come through that channel. And then you add to that the sort of globalization, and you can get very quick spread. So the underlying factors of human collision with the environment and global interconnectivity have produced this pandemic, and there's no way that those things are going away. So I think that the chance that this is the last pandemic of our lives or our careers is extremely low. And whatever capabilities we're developing right now, we need to kind of keep close to us on the shelf, ready to pull off when we need them. And that includes being able to have an astute, data-driven, thoughtful approach to making these incredibly difficult trade-offs like the way that you've been describing.
I absolutely agree with that. In fact, we have had 3 of these nasty viruses the last 20 years. 3. Yeah. So this is not a rare event anymore. In fact, this is more frequent than financial crisis now. Mm-hmm. So we had since the beginning of the 20th century in the United States, we only had 3 big financial crises. Okay, mm-hmm. That's it. So in the 30s, in the 90s, if you count the savings and loans, and the 2008. Okay, so that's it. And we have had 4 pandemics, mm-hmm. and by the way, 3 the last 20.
Yeah.
3 nasty viruses. So yeah, I agree with you. This is, in fact, this is going to have massive changes on the way we're going to provide services like education, what we do, massive impact on tourism. How do you do tourism? Work from home. We need to start thinking about how to develop the skills and the infrastructure to be able to do that.
And to do it in an equitable way. I mean, as you said, the difference of these impacts on people who are on this call relative to, except for healthcare workers, right? Relative to frontline workers in, retail and service sectors and construction it's very dramatic. And how we create that sense of solidarity and that sense of sort of shared fate is a very deep question about the sort of S and I levels of the promise framework, right? Is what kind of institutions and policies can we build that really recognize that very deep interdependence across social classes, across nations,
and the type of jobs. Yeah, absolutely.
There's a couple of questions in the Q&A here I want to make sure that we get to. So one of them is that, I'm just going to read this from Tim Connors. It would seem that you put a focus on individual investment where you might have a limited potential to have an impact. If you take that further to being a pension fund manager, even the pension fund manager might have limited potential to influence what's going on in a company. So is it only when many organizations align behind an issue that impact is made? And so should we be focusing on some kind of collective action versus individual investing strategy, and where do we exercise collective action? I love this question because it reminded me of that paper that Julian Colville, who's our former postdoc, did about when does investment have impact? And they tell the story about a group of nuns investing who, instead of avoiding investing in gun stocks, chose to invest in gun companies and then organized a shareholder campaign that they got Vanguard and BlackRock to join, and then forced the companies to disclose how many people die every year from their firearms, right? And that's an example of that kind of collective action that Tim is pointing to. What do you see as the pathway there for sort of real impact through the capital markets?
Again, if we create transparency and a clear common language, that doesn't mean that we need to have a standard, but a clear common language about how we measure these, mm-hmm. we can use it everywhere. For example, this year we're going to try in the job fair at MIT, which is when the undergrads receive all the companies that are going to offer them jobs. We're going to put a rating in front of every one of the companies. So now the rating is not going to be one number, because that will kind of defeat my whole point of what I'm trying to make here. We are going to actually put four numbers at the beginning and see how it works. We're going to give ratings on the environmental side, on the social side, on the labor side. We're going to separate that, and on the governance side. And so we will just create, we're going to call it GELs, no? Governance, environmental, labor, and social. And the idea of that is that we will just give. By the way, we're not going to put a number. We're going to put, ratings. So where you are, green, you are at the top, or red, you are at the bottom, orange, and so on. We will put color coded.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I would love for the MIT students to actually pay attention to that. Yes.
Yeah.
Not only investors, but labor. We should have the brightest actually paying attention to that. So that's one. I have one question that I saw that it is to you from Toronata, which is where in promise will be corruption if you have to put corruption. So does it include corruption?
Yes. So that's really what the I in promise is designed to stand for. It's about institutions. And when we think about a company and a firm and its impact on institutions, that happens through a couple of channels. One is corruption. Are you paying off, bribing, and therefore undermining the transparency and democracy of institutions? And lobbying. How do you use the power of your influence and your money to sort of drive policy change? And are you driving it in a way that that tries to extract rents and only benefit your firm, or are you doing it in a way that tries to solve for better collective market outcomes, like a carbon price or other things that might internalize externalities? I think one good heuristic is: are you using your influence to externalize your costs, or are you using your influence to have everybody internalize their external costs?
Yeah, in fact, we got a question before this that I want to address, which was, how do you balance the need to develop? This is clearly for developing countries' perspective. So how do you balance the need to develop versus how do you manage the impact that you will have in the environment? This is a very specific question, again, on promise.
Mm-hmm.
But that is asking about the M. The M will be market outcomes and growth, and the E will be about the environment. And to me, by the way, the question is, it depends for every country. And you see, there are easy ways to grow, and there are better ways to grow. This is the way I separate. We need, for a lot of emerging markets, to improve the standards of living. And improving the standard of living doesn't necessarily mean more highways. And it doesn't necessarily mean more consumption. Now, I understand that when you have people that are under the poverty line and they are starving, then yes, part of the solution is to provide more food and better housing and better transportation. But we can actually do investments that are consistent with the environment, that also are consistent with growth. Mm-hmm. So I can produce energy better and become more energy efficient at the same time that I'm providing for the poor. And I can do this through regulation. By the way, I think regulation plays an extremely important role here. So yes. There was another question here about regulation. It is very difficult in an environment of competition, of lowering cost all the time, to do something that is in the short term costly for the environment. Some of these actions will need to be costly in the short run because the payoff are in the future, and so much in the future that maybe the firm will not even enjoy it. But that doesn't mean that it should not happen. They should happen. So regulation is important in this environment. So you need an environmental regulation that provides the incentives for firms to take into account the two things. And can I improve the standards of living in Peru without affecting the environment? The answer would be absolutely yes. Mm-hmm. I have a list of 20 of those. Now, I understand the government doesn't want to do them because it's much easier for them to mine more, okay? Mm-hmm. Destroy more mountains. Yeah, I understand. Yeah, of course, that's easy. By the way, the drillers are there already. Just drill faster.
Harder, just drill a little harder.
Yeah, harder and faster and just destroy it. So, but on the other hand, I always ask a question, and I put the case of Peru because Latin America is very mining. We have a very mining mentality. We're very natural resource intensive. I always ask the question, how much have it pay off the natural resources to improve the standards of living of our citizens? Mm-hmm. Because I think actually the payoff has been relatively small. Mm-hmm. How much it has paid off to educate our citizens, that has been a much bigger one. How much it has paid to allow foreigners to enter to our region. Latin America was the recipient of millions of foreigners during World War II. And we benefit tremendously in our region because of that. So you see, I think that there are better answers. Now there's an easy answer, which is just do more of what you have been doing. I understand that. But there's a hard answer, and I think better one, which is to think, what are the alternatives? And the promise framework will actually deal with that.
So,
and by the way, I'm excluding corruption from this. So yes.
We're reaching the end of our hour here, and so I want to just say a couple words of closure here. One is that we really appreciate all of you taking the time to be part of this conversation amid everything that's going on. We hope that this has been interesting and a touch point. I really miss what is supposed to happen right now in a reunion, which is that we get mobbed by people and we get to talk to everybody, and I get to reconnect with our 2015 sustainability grads and give some big hugs, and just the connectivity of being in a community is a thing that we've been missing so much over the course of the spring, in which I'm missing very much right now in this reunion context. But hopefully this gives you a little touch point into what we're doing at MIT Sloan. And then just encourage you to continue the conversation with us. Reach out, especially if you're working in these territories. If you're interested in learning more about what we're doing on the climate simulations, on the measurement work, with the education work, with the master's students, executive education, anything, just reach out and email to us. And we love to engage with our alumni. It's a totally critical part. When we teach our S-Lab course and we have students work on projects with companies, we're working on increasing the percentage of those projects that are hosted by alumni. So we'd love to hear about what you're doing. And just want to really use MIT Sloan as a platform for the kind of collective action that you're pointing out in your comments and in your questions.
And let me say one final word. I think that we rely tremendously on you to do most of these projects. So 100% of what we do, I would say that my research in particular, just talk about my research, 100% of my research has been financed by alumni, and it is financed by people exactly like you. We need your help, and I will be asking for your help. We think that a lot of what we do can change the narrative that we have in the world right now, and I think that that's a responsibility that MIT and all the alumni from MIT is not only willing to take, but they are willing to take the challenge and the responsibility to solve them. So I am very excited about the new area of research, which is called ESG Machine, where we are going to be actually learning about preferences. I hope that when that comes out, that you actually engage with it, that you play the game, and that you also learn who you are, what you are, and that we somehow can understand some of the very difficult trade-offs. Let me just say something about what the Sustainability Initiative is trying to do, that is embracing what I think MIT means. So MIT actually means multidisciplinary, important, and thankless. That's actually what it means. It means to do something that is really hard, that nobody thanks you for it, and that is actually extremely important to do. And so this is what we're trying to do in the Sustainability Initiative, and I really, really hope that you all can help us continue. Thanks for being here. Your support is, super inspiring, and that we can actually continue, making what is part of our mission to make the world a better place. So without you guys, that would be impossible. Thank you so much for all, and thank you so much for Greg, Patsy, and Lauren for organizing this. I am a useless in technology, even though I'm an electrical engineer, but I got there in 1984, so my technology was actually, the tubes on the TV. so thanks to all of them for making this work, and thank you for being here. Thank you, Jason, for sharing the podium with us.
Great to be with
you. Thank you, professors. You've brought us back into the classroom today, and so we're so grateful for your time. And thank you to our viewers. To keep this conversation going over social media, please use the hashtag #SloanieReunion. And thank you to our alumni and friends who have given to the Sloan Annual Fund and the Immediate Needs and Emerging Opportunities Fund in honor of your reunion. Your generosity makes a difference, and we thank you for that. So please, it's Reunion Week, so join us online at MIT Sloan Virtual Reunion 2020.com to see a lineup of our additional virtual class events and gatherings. Take care, everyone, and happy reunion. Thanks again for joining us.
Bye.
Thank you.